I'm Bridget Baxter, 32. The morning of my wedding, I pushed open the heavy church chapel doors to find 140 completely empty seats. While I was sound asleep, my own mother had successfully sabotaged my future. Between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., she sat in the dark with my stolen guest list and ruthlessly dialed every single person. She spread a vicious lie that the ceremony was off because I was suffering a severe psychological breakdown. She ordered them all to stay away. My father's only contribution to this nightmare was a single text message. "Come home now. No child of mine weds without my blessing." I stood all alone in that massive room, my heavy white dress still zipped in its bag, staring out at a sea of empty wood. The beautiful floral centerpieces were already arranged at the altar, mocking me in the dead silence. But I refused to shatter. I didn't shed a tear. Instead, I grabbed my phone and made exactly one call. What happened over the next 45 minutes didn't just rescue my ruined wedding day. It completely rewrote the woman I was meant to become. Before I take you back to that morning, if this story hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with it. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 4 weeks before the wedding. Straight to the night my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You will regret this." Maplewood, Virginia has a population of about 9,500. It is the kind of town where the thick summer air feels heavy with secrets. Your mail carrier knows your dog's name, and your Wednesday church pew has your family's initials carved deep into the dark wood. If something happens at the post office on Tuesday morning, the Methodist Church has heard all about it by Thursday evening. My mother, Delilah Harrington, did not just live in that tight little world. She ruled it. She organized the church bake sale every single spring, smiling brightly in her floral dresses. She dropped off warm casseroles when someone's husband fell ill. She volunteered for the school board years after I had already graduated. Everyone in Maplewood knew Mrs. Harrington as the saint, the woman who gave and gave and gave. They did not know her behind closed doors. At home, the smiles vanished. The air always felt cold, like walking on thin ice. My mother decided exactly what I wore until I was 15 years old. She read my private journal, memorizing my deepest fears, only to quote them back to me with a cruel twist during our arguments. She picked my friends, she picked my hobbies, she even picked my college major, until I secretly switched to nursing during my junior year. When she found out, she did not yell. She just stopped looking at me. She didn't speak to me for 4 whole weeks. "I am invisible," I used to tell myself. "I only exist when she wants me to." My mother didn't raise me. She curated me, like a doll in a glass display case. When I got engaged to Mitchell 3 years ago, I called her from our tiny kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I tried to make my voice sound bright and happy. "Mom, Mitchell proposed." Nothing. 5 days of crushing silence followed. No call, no text, no heartbeat of a response. Just a hollow, heavy waiting. On day 6, she finally phoned. Her voice was flat, empty of any joy. "I hope you know what you're giving up," she said. I gripped the counter. I asked her what she meant. "Your freedom, Bridget. Men take that." I told her Mitchell wasn't like that. He was kind. He was safe. She just let out a sharp laugh. Short, dry, like a match that wouldn't catch. After that awful call, she shockingly agreed to help with the wedding, and that was exactly when things started going sideways in strange, invisible ways I couldn't explain at first. The seamstress called to confirm a dress style I had never chosen. The venue asked about a sudden date change I had never requested. Small things, tiny, maddening shifts that made me feel crazy. At the time, I foolishly thought that was the absolute worst she would do. I wondered, how did she even know who to call? 2 weeks prior, she had dropped by our house with a cherry pie. While I was washing my hands in the bathroom, she took her smartphone out and photographed every single page of my wedding planner binder. Every vendor, every private number, every signed contract. It was a cold, calculated betrayal. I had no idea she had been making secret phone calls behind my back for weeks. I met Mitchell Weaver the summer I turned 28. He was standing on the roof of Rachel Preston, our old neighbor, replacing her broken shingles completely for free because Rachel had casually mentioned her leak at church. I brought up 2 cold bottles of water. He climbed down the ladder, wiped the sweat from his brow, took a bottle, and smiled softly. "I'm Mitchell. I build things." 5 years later, I still can't think of a truer way to describe him. Mitchell builds things. Houses for the charity Homes for Hope. Sturdy shelves for our kitchen. Safe plans for when the world feels like it is falling apart. He is quiet. He doesn't perform for anyone's applause. And my mother hated that steady quiet from the very start. The first time Mitchell came to dinner at my parents' house, the dining room felt tense. My mother had purposefully set only 2 places at the table instead of 3. When I nervously pointed it out, she acted surprised. "Oh, I forgot, your friend is joining us." Mitchell didn't blink. He calmly pulled a heavy wooden chair from the hallway, sat down right beside me, and simply said, "Grace," when my father asked him to pray. The second dinner was so much worse. Halfway through the meal, my mother slowly set her silver fork down. The soft clink echoed in the room. She looked straight into Mitchell's eyes. "So Mitchell, when were you planning to ask us for permission?" The entire table went dead still. My father chewed his food slowly, staring at his plate. I opened my mouth to defend us, panic rising in my chest. But Mitchell answered first. His voice was completely unshaken. "I asked Bridget. That's who I'm marrying." My mother gave a tight, controlled smile. It was the kind of smile that actually looks like a door locking shut. "Well, I suppose that's how things are done now." I found out months later that my mother had written a formal letter to Mitchell's supervisor at the construction firm. She lied. She told his boss that Mitchell was unreliable and potentially dishonest. His boss called him in, totally confused. Mitchell handled the mess quietly. He didn't even tell me about it until I stumbled upon the folded letter hidden in a drawer. That deep betrayal should have been my loud wake-up call. It wasn't. I just kept foolishly hoping she would eventually come around. Here is the most painful thing about my father. Gordon Harrington, everyone calls him Gordy, is the sole reason I kept going back to that house. When I was 10, he patiently taught me how to change a flat tire in the hot driveway, while my mother glared at us from the kitchen window. When I was 13, he took me fishing every single Wednesday morning, just the 2 of us. We would sit on the wooden dock for 4 solid hours, barely speaking a word. The water lapping against the wood was the only sound. It was the only place in my entire life where silence actually felt safe. My father loved me. I never once doubted that fact. But his love came with a heavy hidden condition I didn't understand until I was fully grown. His love existed only inside the tight space my mother allowed. When I was 15, I proudly brought home an A in biology. My mother took one look at the report card and decided I couldn't eat dinner that night. "You don't reward mediocrity," she stated coldly, and sent me straight to my bedroom. My stomach growled. I cried into my pillow. 2 hours later, the door creaked open. My father tiptoed upstairs and brought a plain turkey sandwich into my dark room. He quietly set it on my desk, gently squeezed my shaking shoulder, and walked right back out. He never said a single word to her, not once. I spent 21 long years telling my broken heart that the sad turkey sandwich was enough. I told myself that his quiet rebellion meant he was secretly on my side. I believed that if I just worked a little harder, if I became a successful charge nurse, if I bought my own house by 29, my mother would finally see my true value. And then my father wouldn't have to sneak sad sandwiches up the stairs anymore. He could finally love me in the bright, open daylight. That was my massive blind spot. I wasn't actually afraid of my mother's anger. I was terrified of losing the only parent who ever felt like a real home. Mitchell saw the painful truth long before I did, but he never pushed me. He just held my hand, steady and warm, and waited patiently for my heart to catch up to reality. But time was running out. The wedding was weeks away, and Delilah Harrington was already preparing her sharpest knife. Exactly 4 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, the doorbell rang. I didn't expect anyone. Opening the door, I found my mother standing on the porch. She stepped inside my home completely uninvited, bringing a sudden chill into the living room. She gracefully sat on my gray couch, crossed her legs, and smoothed her skirt. "Why is she here? She never just visits." "Bridget, I need to tell you something about Mitchell," she stated softly. What she claimed next still makes my stomach turn. I can barely believe she had the absolute nerve. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. It was the exact pose she always took when delivering something meant to break you. She looked calm, perfectly composed, like a surgeon about to deliver a fatal diagnosis. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "I saw Mitchell having dinner with another woman in Clark County last Tuesday." My pulse violently jumped. I hated my body for reacting, for letting her toxic words land. "No. It's a trick. Don't let her see you sweat." "Who?" I demanded, my throat tight. "I don't know her name," she replied smoothly. "Where exactly?" "A restaurant near the square." "Which restaurant, Mom?" She paused. It was just a single second of silence, but I caught the tiny hesitation. "I don't remember the name. It was one of those little places. My hands shook as I grabbed my cell phone. I hit Mitchell's contact and put it straight on speaker. The dial tone echoed loudly in the tense room. He answered on the second ring. "Bridge, everything okay?" His deep, steady voice filled the air. I took a breath. "Were you in Clark County last Tuesday?" "Yeah, Homes for Hope board meeting at the community center. Pastor Gray was there. 14 of us." I slowly looked up at my mother. She didn't flinch. Her face remained a frozen mask. She sat perfectly still, like an actress watching a play she had already written and rehearsed. "Well," she casually sighed, uncrossing and recrossing her legs. Maybe I was mistaken about that. There was no apology, no guilt, just a terrifying pivot. But the simple fact that you trust him more than your own mother, that says absolutely everything, Bridget. "It says I called him and got a straight answer in 15 seconds, I fired back. Her jaw visibly tightened. The fake sweetness melted away. "You are choosing a man you've known 5 years over the woman who gave you life. I'm choosing the person who doesn't lie to me." She stood up abruptly, her eyes flashing with pure ice. She walked briskly to the front door. "You will see," she threatened without even turning around to look at me. "When this falls apart, do not come crying to me." The heavy door clicked firmly shut. I collapsed onto the cushions, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A toxic memory suddenly rushed back. When I was 18, my mother told my best friend Chloe that I had been speaking terribly about her behind her back. Chloe was so hurt she stopped talking to me for 14 miserable months. Same cruel playbook, just a different decade. I couldn't stay in the house. I rushed outside and locked myself in my car. The engine stayed off. The driveway was suffocatingly quiet. My hands trembled so violently I had to press them completely flat against the steering wheel to force them to stop. Right there, breathing hard, I mentally made a list. These were the things I would lose forever if I kept pretending this nightmare was normal. Number 1, Mitchell. He had never given me an ugly ultimatum. He never demanded, "It is me or your mother." But I could see the damage forming. I noticed the way his broad shoulders instinctively tightened every single time my phone lit up with her caller ID. I saw how he went completely quiet after our agonizing family dinners. He wasn't angry, he was just drained. He looked like a good man who had been carrying a crushing weight for way too long. If I kept dragging him through her emotional war zone, I wouldn't lose him in a dramatic fight. I would lose him to slow, painful erosion. Number 2, my own physical health. I had been suffering from blinding headaches that started right behind my left eye and spread across my skull like a slow-burning fire. I wasn't sleeping through the dark nights anymore. My therapist, the kind woman I had been seeing for over a year, kept bringing up the word cortisol. My body was breaking down under the stress. Number 3, the future. If Mitchell and I had children, and we desperately wanted them, those innocent kids would eventually sit at Delilah Harrington's dining table. They would quickly learn that love always comes with harsh conditions, that affection must be painfully earned, that a tiny mistake means you go to bed hungry. I cannot let her poison them too. I had tried everything to fix us. I really had. 3 years ago, I practically begged my mother to attend family counseling with me. Surprisingly, she agreed. We went exactly 1 time. 20 minutes into the session, the doctor gently asked Delilah to describe a specific moment she felt genuinely proud of me. My mother stared blankly at the professional, suddenly stood up and declared, "This man is clearly biased." She marched out of the clinic and never returned. That same night, Mitchell sat beside me on our back porch. The summer crickets screamed loudly in the pitch-black yard. He didn't speak for a very long time, just letting me lean my tired head against his shoulder. Then he turned to me and whispered 6 heavy words that changed the course of my life. "What if she actually does it?" I frowned in the dim light. Does what? Cancels the wedding, calls people, makes the whole day just disappear. I desperately wanted to say that was crazy. I wanted to claim my mother was just difficult, not a destructive monster. But the lie died in my throat. Deep down, in the bruised part of my soul that had watched Delilah operate for 32 years, I knew the awful truth. She was fully capable of destroying anything, as long as she could cleverly frame the destruction as motherly love. "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mitchell calmly pulled his glowing smartphone from his pocket. "We make a second list." Our backup plan was born in the dark, but we had no idea if it would actually be strong enough to survive the absolute hurricane she was about to unleash. 3 weeks before the big day, the clinic was packed. I was quickly updating a patient chart when my cell buzzed. It was Sylvia, my florist. "Hey Bridget," her voice sounded hesitant. "Your mom phoned this morning. She said you wanted to switch all the table centerpieces to white lotuses. My fingers gripped the hard plastic edge of the nurse's station so tightly my knuckles turned white. She knows I am highly allergic. She knows those flowers make my throat close. I'm allergic to lotuses, Sylvia, I managed to say, my chest tightening with rising panic. Dead silence hung on the other end of the line. Yeah, Sylvia finally muttered. I thought that request was incredibly strange. 40 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. My photographer this time. Mrs. Harrington told me you are drastically downsizing the event, he said, sounding genuinely confused. She wants to cancel the second shooter to save money. She is tearing it all down, piece by piece. Do not cancel a single thing, I ordered, my voice shaking with pure anger. My mother is absolutely not in charge of this event. That same evening, I drove straight to my parents' house. I did not call ahead. I marched up the familiar concrete steps and rang the doorbell like a complete stranger. My mother pulled the heavy door open wearing her silk bathrobe, a steaming mug of black coffee in her hand. Her face was already perfectly arranged into a mask of innocent surprise. Bridget, what a lovely surprise. Did you call my florist? I demanded, skipping the fake politeness. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her mug. I was only trying to help. I didn't ask for your help. You never do, she sighed, playing the wounded victim beautifully. That is the main problem. No, I stepped closer, staring right into her cold eyes. The actual problem is that you are calling my hired vendors without my permission. A mother shouldn't have to ask, she stated, her chin lifting slightly. I kept my tone completely level. I used every single de-escalation technique I had ever learned from calming down panicked parents in the pediatric ward. I weaponized my professional calm right there on her front porch. Mom, if you contact anyone involved in my wedding ever again, you will not be allowed to attend. 5 agonizing seconds of silence stretched between us. The yellow porch light buzzed loudly above our heads. You wouldn't dare, she scoffed. Try me. I turned on my heel and marched back to my car. Before I even reached the driver's side door, I heard her muffled voice through the living room window. She was already on the phone. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice carried that careful, heavily managed tone, the exact pitch Delilah always coached out of him when she needed a shield. Baby girl, please don't upset your mother. She has been crying all afternoon. She called my florist to order flowers that could send me to the hospital, Dad. A long, painful pause. She is just trying to feel involved, honey. I hung up the phone. A cold realization washed over me. I immediately pulled out my laptop and called every single vendor, setting up a strict verbal password for all my accounts. No one touches this day without the secret word. But the real storm began 4 days later. The calls did not come from my mother. They came from her loyal army. Aunt Grace, her younger sister, rang first. Bridget, honey, your mama says you are banning her from helping. Is that true? She tried to change my flowers to something toxic to me. I explained, deep exhaustion creeping into my bones. Well, I am sure she didn't mean any harm. Next was Cousin Roy. Delilah says you have been horribly disrespectful, Bridge. She is real torn up about it. Then came Penny from the church quilting circle. Sweetie, your poor mama was in tears at Bible study. One by one the phone rang. Each caller held a tiny distorted fragment of the exact same lie. Each one was entirely convinced they knew the whole truth. By Tuesday afternoon, Aunt Grace called a second time. Now her tone was sharp and hard. I am going to be straight with you, Grace warned. If you cut your mother out, do not expect anyone in this family to show up. Is that a threat, Aunt Grace? It's reality, sweetheart. I sank to the hard kitchen floor, pressing my back against the wooden cabinets. I stared up at the printed guest list, securely taped to the refrigerator door. 140 names. I slowly ran a trembling finger down the neat columns and counted them. 95 of those people were my mother's relatives, her book club friends, her church ladies. People who would blindly believe whatever Delilah fed them simply because she always spoke first. This list was never mine, I realized, a heavy lump forming in my throat. It was her audience. I grabbed my phone and quickly texted Mallory. Start confirming the second list. Her reply dinged in under 60 seconds. Already done, 215 confirmed, still counting. I read that massive number twice. I dropped the phone onto the tiles and for the first time in an entire month, my lungs filled with a full, deep breath. Then came Wednesday night, just 11 days before I was supposed to wear a white dress. My screen lit up. The caller ID simply read, Dad, not parents, not mom and dad, Just him. He almost never called me alone. "Hey, Daddy," I answered softly. "Hey, baby girl." His voice was unusually low. I could faintly hear a baseball game playing on the television behind him. The volume was muted. That meant my mother was in another room. It meant he had bravely waited for her to walk away before dialing my number. "Listen," he murmured. "Just let your mama manage a few little things. It ain't that hard to keep the peace." "Daddy, she isn't helping. She is actively trying to cancel my wedding." Quiet. I heard him shift uncomfortably in his favorite leather recliner. The material squeaked. "She is your mother, Bridget. She knows what is best. She tried to order lotuses. I am allergic. She knows that," I pleaded, begging him to finally see the danger. More agonizing quiet. It lasted long enough for me to hear the muffled TV announcer call a strikeout. "Well," he finally sighed. "Maybe there was a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. There it was. The magic word he had used my entire life to paper over every single cruel thing his wife ever did, as if Delilah Harrington ever did anything by pure accident. "Daddy, I need you to hear me clearly. Mom is trying to control everything. If she does not stop, she will not be there. Now, Bridget, I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you a fact." The longest, most heartbreaking silence of my life stretched across the cell towers. "She's your mother?" he repeated softly, like it was the only broken sentence he had left in his vocabulary. I hung up. I pulled my knees to my chest and pressed the phone against my heart. Hot tears finally spilled down my cheeks. I wasn't crying because of my mother's viciousness. I was sobbing because of him. Because in 62 years on this earth, my father had never once chosen to protect his own daughter over avoiding his wife's temper. And I finally understood the devastating truth. He never would. Mitchell quietly slid down the cabinets and sat right next to me on the cold floor. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just gently took my hand in the dark kitchen. "Okay," I whispered, wiping my wet face. "I am done waiting for him to be the father I need." The wedding was merely 11 days away, but my mother's real war had only just begun. Rachel Preston has owned Rachel's Diner on Market Street for 32 long years. She opened her cozy restaurant the exact same year I was born, which she fondly likes to call the two absolute best things Maplewood ever produced in 1993. The air inside always smells thickly of melting butter and fresh coffee, a sharp, comforting contrast to the coldness of my own family. I stopped by the diner the following Thursday to finalize the catering order. Rachel was standing behind the worn front counter, vigorously rolling out sticky biscuit dough. White flour dusted her arms all the way up to her elbows, and her silver hair was tied back tight with a faded red bandana. "How is your mama taking all this?" she asked casually, without even looking up from her wooden board. I leaned heavily against the laminate counter, rubbing my exhausted eyes. "She is making it impossible." Rachel immediately stopped rolling. She set the heavy pin down, slowly wiped her hands on her stained apron, and locked her dark, fiercely steady eyes onto mine. "Let me tell you something," she stated softly. 22 years ago, your mother violently pulled you out of the middle school talent show right in front of every single parent in that crowded auditorium. You were only 12. You mispronounced one single word during your speech, and she marched right up to that stage, grabbed your skinny arm, and announced to the whole room, "She is not ready for any of this." I swallowed hard. The painful memory rushed back. My face burned just hearing the story out loud. I remember staring at my shoes, wishing the floor would open up and swallow me. "I watched you walk out of that gym with your head hanging down," Rachel continued, her voice trembling with ancient anger. "And I made a silent promise to myself right then. If I ever got the rare chance to stand up for you, I would take it." She reached deep into her deep apron pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled business card. On the blank back, she had scribbled her personal cell number and one single word: emergencies. "Whatever happens next, Bridget, you call me." I started to politely protest, to say she didn't have to go out of her way. "I have fed half this entire town for over 3 decades, she interrupted, picking up her heavy rolling pin again. "When I say I will be there, I will be there." On the quiet drive home, I carefully tucked Rachel's card behind my driver's license. A mother's fierce protection, from someone who isn't even my mother. I had no idea then how soon I would desperately need to dial those numbers. The very next day, Uncle Dave called. I had not heard his voice in 3 months. He lived down in Charlotte, 5 long hours away, and we mostly just traded generic birthday cards. "Hey kid," he greeted me. His voice sounded significantly rougher than I remembered. 65 years of keeping painful family secrets had worn deep, gravelly grooves into his throat. "I heard what your mother is doing." "From who?" I gasped. "Your daddy called me last week, first time in a very long while." I slowly sat down on the edge of my mattress. Dave and Gordy had been incredibly close as young boys. But when my father married Delilah 36 years ago, Dave had warned him straight out, "That woman is going to isolate you from every single person who loves you." Delilah eventually found out about the warning. Her punishment was swift and brutal. She cut Dave out of our family tree for almost 12 years. He was only allowed back into our lives when I turned 9, on the strict, unspoken condition that he never interfere in her household again. "I want you to know a hard truth," Dave murmured through the speaker. "Your daddy truly loves you. He just never learned how to show it without her strict permission." "I know," I whispered, blinking back hot tears. "And I should have said something much sooner about a whole lot of things. I am so sorry, kid." I nervously picked at a loose thread on my bedspread. "Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does." "Uncle Dave? Yeah? Will you come to my wedding?" He let out a short, incredibly warm laugh that sounded exactly like the crackle of a good campfire. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. I already booked the flight. I smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "Thank you," I breathed. "Don't thank me, just save me a good seat." 2 beautiful phone calls, 2 brave people who clearly saw exactly what my mother was and actively chose to stand next to me anyway. A few days later, the illusion of peace shattered. My hospital pager violently beeped against my hip while I was at work. I glanced down. ER, bed 4, Delilah Harrington. Chest pains. My blood instantly turned to ice. My vision tunneled until all I could see were the harsh fluorescent lights. The pale walls of the hospital began closing in on me. I sprinted down the linoleum corridors. When I burst into the waiting room, half the town's church congregation was already sitting there. They glared at me like I had personally shoved her down a flight of stairs. I could hear their vicious whispers about the cold, ungrateful daughter who was too busy planning a party to care for her dying mother. I shoved past the swinging doors and ripped her medical chart from the plastic holder. My hands shook uncontrollably. I read the glowing monitor: normal sinus rhythm, normal troponin levels, perfect blood pressure, diagnosis, anxiety, or as I accurately translated it in my head, pure manipulation. I marched to the foot of her hospital bed. She looked incredibly frail, performing the role of the dying victim perfectly for the gullible nurses. She was simply waiting for me to break down, fall to my knees, cry, and loudly beg for her grand forgiveness. She is playing the dying swan just to win a game. I did not reach out to hold her hand. I did not shed a single tear. I just stared blankly at the heart monitor ticking away with perfect, healthy rhythm. Then, I turned sharply on my heel and walked straight out of the emergency room without uttering a single syllable. That was the exact moment the final frayed string binding us completely snapped. I knew she was going to war. Wednesday morning arrived. Exactly 2 weeks before the ceremony, Maplewood Methodist Church. I almost stayed home. Mitchell gently said I didn't have to go, but I had sat in that specific wooden pew every Wednesday for 26 years. I was absolutely not about to let Delilah Harrington steal my faith from me too. The morning service went fine. Pastor Gray ironically preached a long sermon about having patience. Afterward, the entire congregation migrated into the stuffy fellowship hall for cheap coffee and powdered donuts. 50-some people milled around in their Sunday best. I was quietly pouring sweet cream into my styrofoam cup when my mother suddenly stood up from a squeaky folding chair right in the center of the crowded room. She dramatically pressed a white tissue to her dry eye. "I just want y'all to please pray for my Bridget." Her voice cracked in all the perfectly practiced places. "She is going through a really dark time. The wedding might not even happen. I just do not know what is wrong with her lately." Every single head in the room aggressively whipped toward me. I could physically feel the heavy weight of it. 50 pairs of judging eyes. Some looked sympathetic, some wildly curious, some already mentally writing the juicy gossip to share later. I calmly set my coffee down on the table. My hand did not shake. "The wedding is absolutely happening," I announced clearly, my voice cutting through the thick silence. "Sunday at this very church. I would love to see every single one of you there." My mother's hand holding the tissue dropped a fraction of an inch. "Honey, you are terribly confused. We need to discuss this privately as a family." "We are not talking, Mom. You are performing, and I am officially done being your captive audience." The fellowship hall went so dead quiet I could actually hear the ceiling air conditioning unit humming. Mrs. Peterson near the stained glass window slowly lowered her half-eaten donut. Mr. and Mrs. Barnes exchanged a shocked glance. Pastor Gray stood frozen by the silver coffee urn, watching the entire showdown unfold. My mother's face rapidly cycled through 3 distinct expressions in 3 seconds. Genuine shock, explosive fury, and finally, a flawless mask of deeply wounded dignity. "I am simply worried about my sick daughter," she whispered, projecting her voice just loud enough for the back row to hear. I picked up my coffee and confidently walked out the double doors. A few minutes later, Pastor Gray found me standing alone in the gravel parking lot. He looked at me with kind, weary eyes. "Bridget, the church sanctuary is securely booked for Sunday. Your signature is on the rental contract. Absolutely no one can cancel that but you." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Pastor. Go have your beautiful wedding," he smiled. I had boldly survived her hospital trap and easily defeated her church ambush, but I was completely blind to the midnight massacre she was secretly plotting next. That night, my cell logged 14 missed calls from my mother. I didn't answer a single one. At 8:45 p.m., a text buzzed from Delilah. "You humiliated me in front of the entire congregation. You are selfish, ungrateful, and you will regret this for the rest of your life." 30 minutes later, Gordy chimed in. "Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Are you happy now?" Finally, Aunt Grace delivered the last blow. "You just broke your mother's heart in public. Don't call me." I sat alone at my quiet kitchen table and read them one by one. Each hateful message glowed on the glass screen like a small, bright wound. They are just reading her script, I thought, staring at the letters. I read them exactly the way I read critical patient charts at work. Carefully, clinically, desperately searching for the hidden data underneath the loud distress. The data clearly said this. Every person caught in my mother's orbit had just received the exact same twisted version of events. Bridget was cruel. Bridget was unstable. Bridget viciously attacked her poor, defenseless mother. Not a single one of those people had actually been standing there when Delilah stood up and performed her fake one-woman tragedy. They only heard what she spoon-fed them afterward. Mitchell sat right across the wooden table, reading the harsh texts over my shoulder. He didn't say anything to interrupt my racing thoughts. He just poured me a tall glass of ice water and waited patiently. Then my phone rang again. "How is the backup list?" Mallory asked. No polite preamble, no useless small talk. Mallory Robbins never wastes her breath. "Tell them to save Sunday," I whispered. "Already texted 95 of them. Everyone confirmed. I will finish the rest by morning." I hung up the call and stared down at my device. Delilah's name was still glowing brightly in the notification bar, demanding my attention. I slowly pressed and held her contact name. A tiny menu popped up. "Block this caller." I tapped it. For the very first time in 32 years, I shut the heavy gate. I set the phone face down on the table and drank my water. "She is going to escalate," Mitchell warned softly. "I know," I nodded. We somehow survived the most suffocating rehearsal dinner ever held at Rachel's diner. The air felt thick enough to choke on. Delilah had aggressively insisted on giving a toast. She stood up tall, sharply clinked her crystal glass, and looked directly at my soon-to-be husband. "To Mitchell," she announced, her voice dripping with pure venom thinly disguised as sweet concern. "May he realize what he is taking on before it is simply too late." Dead, icy silence. All the warm air instantly left the crowded room. I abruptly excused myself to the tiny bathroom, my hands violently shaking under the running sink water. Cousin Roy's timid wife Claire quickly slipped through the door right behind me. Claire had been a silent, terrified ghost living under Delilah's heavy thumb for over a decade. She tightly grabbed my bare arm, her wide eyes wild with fear, her breath hitching in her throat. "Bridget, your mother is planning something massive tonight." I heard her whispering on the phone with Aunt Grace in the dark hallway. "Lock your plans down right now. Protect yourself." My heart hammered fiercely against my ribs. The hurricane is finally making landfall. Saturday night, the dreaded eve of my wedding. Mallory came over carrying greasy takeout boxes and a cheap bottle of champagne. Mitchell drove his truck over to his buddy's house. We decided to spend the final night apart. It was a normal wedding tradition, the only normal thing in a month that had been anything but. Mallory and I ate salty chow mein on the couch, watched a terrible comedy movie, and went to bed early. I set my digital alarm for 7:15 a.m. I flipped my phone to silent mode. Surprisingly, I slept deep and completely dreamless for the first time in weeks. Miles across town, my mother was wide awake. I learned the horrifying details much later from a guilty cousin Roy, from Aunt Grace, from the confused people who answered their ringing phones in the dark. Delilah sat proudly at her kitchen table. Right in front of her rested a printed copy of my guest list. Starting at exactly 11 p.m., she began dialing them, one by one, 140 calls. But she didn't dial them all herself. There simply wasn't enough time before dawn. She called the 40 most vicious gossips first. She handed them the script, and they eagerly deployed like loyal soldiers. It was a systematic, ruthless phone tree specifically designed to burn my entire wedding to the ground before the sun even came up. The sinister message was identical every single time. "Hi, this is Delilah Harrington, Bridgette's mother. I am so terribly sorry to tell you this, but the wedding has been called off. Bridgette is going through a severe mental health crisis. We are begging for privacy. Please do not contact her right now." The exact same lie, repeated 140 times between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. Some worried people questioned her. "Is Bridgette okay? Should we call her?" My mother firmly said no. She insisted the family needed total space. Meanwhile, my father sat in his faded recliner in the adjacent living room. The TV glowed. He heard every single malicious call. He didn't say a word. He is listening to her burn my future down, and he is just changing the channel. But 3 confused people on that list, when they couldn't reach my silent phone, frantically called Mallory instead. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Mallory's screen lit up. She was already wide awake, waiting for the attack. She handles corporate crisis management for a living. My mother had picked the absolute wrong enemy. Mallory quickly exported our secret backup list, loaded it into a mass broadcast emergency text app, and aggressively hit send at 2:15 a.m. She set up a brilliant automated reply. Y=yes, N=no. Do not call. Bridgette is sleeping. By 3 a.m., her glowing laptop screen looked like the stock market ticking rapidly upward in bright green. Sunday, November 14th. 7:15 a.m., I slowly opened my tired eyes, reached over and turned off the buzzing alarm. I switched off silent mode. Instantly my phone exploded. It vibrated. Again and again. The glass screen lit up like a frantic slot machine. 52 unread text messages, 28 missed calls. I opened the very first text from Laura, my favorite coworker. "Bridge, your mom called me last night. Is the wedding really off?" My stomach dropped into my toes. I scrolled through message after dizzying message. The same panicked question typed in different words. "Is it true? Are you okay? Your mother said you are having a breakdown." Mallory suddenly appeared in my bedroom doorway, already fully dressed, hair perfectly done. "She did it," I whispered, barely breathing. "I know. I have been up since 2, Mallory replied calmly. "How bad?" I choked out. "She called every single person on your list, all 140. I sat frozen on the edge of the mattress. My beautiful white garment bag hung heavily on the closet door. "How many do we actually have left?" I asked. 230 confirmed on the backup list. The very first ones are already driving here. I stood up, walked into the cold bathroom and splashed water on my face. I looked closely at myself in the mirror. Red eyes, messy hair, the exhausted face of a woman whose own mother had just tried to erase her joy from existence. But as I grabbed my car keys to drive to the venue, a terrifying thought gripped me. What if she had gotten to the church doors before us? I drove to the church. Mallory followed closely behind me in her own car. The crisp Sunday morning air bit at my cheeks as I sprinted up the wide stone steps. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the main sanctuary door and pulled. It didn't budge, locked tight. Through the thick stained glass, I spotted a familiar figure. It was Mrs. Higgins, the church secretary and my mother's oldest spy, scurrying away down the dim hallway like a frightened mouse. A freshly printed sign was securely taped to the inside of the glass door. "Closed for family emergency." Blind panic hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My lungs completely seized up. I couldn't drag a single breath into my body. "It is over," my mind screamed. She actually won. She locked me out of my own future. I leaned against the cold wood, my knees trembling, ready to collapse. But then heavy tires violently crunched on the loose gravel behind me. Mitchell's work truck skidded into the parking lot. He jumped out, took one hard look at my pale face, and saw the locked door. He didn't ask questions. He didn't panic. He walked straight to the metal toolbox sitting in his truck bed. He doesn't yell. He just fixes whatever she breaks. I build things, Bridge, he stated calmly, pulling out a heavy steel crowbar and a power drill. And I unbuild them. Within 90 seconds, he expertly bypassed the complex lock mechanism and popped the heavy metal hinges right off the side entrance. We were finally in. He easily pushed the massive wooden slab aside. The doors were wide open. Sylvia, the florist, had come incredibly early and had been trapped inside the building. She was frantically setting up stunning white poppies on the end of every single pew. The wooden altar was beautifully framed in lush green vines. The room looked absolutely breathtaking, and it was completely, hauntingly empty. Not a single person sat in the 140 wooden seats. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A fresh text from Gordy. "Come home. No daughter of mine marries without my permission." I read the cruel words twice. "You handed her the keys to my cage, Dad. But I am finally breaking out." I set the phone face down on the nearest empty pew. I walked straight into the back room to put on my white wedding dress. I need you to hear this part clearly. Standing inside that vast, empty church, staring at my reflection in the mirror, I realized something miraculous. I wasn't angry at my mother anymore. I was completely free. For the very first time in my life, I wasn't desperately performing for her harsh audience. I was about to officially meet mine. If you have ever felt like you desperately needed someone else's permission to simply live your life, stay with me. The next part of this story is specifically for you. At 9:15 a.m., I was standing in the cramped dressing room, buttoning the very last delicate pearl on my lace sleeve, when I heard a massive diesel engine rumble into the church lot. Brakes squealed loudly. A heavy truck door slammed shut. Then came footsteps. Fast, heavy, purposeful strides echoing loudly down the quiet side hallway. Rachel Preston appeared in the wooden doorway. She was 69 years old, wearing a bright white apron over a simple navy blue dress. White baking flour still dusted her left elbow. Right behind her, 3 of her loyal restaurant staff members carried large aluminum catering trays stacked 5 high. She looked out at the empty fellowship hall through the open door. Then, she looked back at me in my white gown. She didn't ask a single probing question. "I brought enough hot food for 350 people," she announced firmly, "just in case." She immediately turned around and started loudly directing her crew. Silver trays clattered onto wooden tables. Crisp tablecloths were pulled from a cardboard box in her truck. Stacks of napkins, serving utensils, and a massive 12-gallon tub of icy sweet tea appeared out of nowhere. She moved swiftly through that quiet church like a fierce warrior who had been preparing for this exact battle her entire life. I stood frozen in the dressing room doorway, one trembling hand gripping the frame. I felt something massive crack wide open deep inside my chest. "Rachel," I gasped. My voice completely broke on her name. She stopped giving orders, walked straight back to me, and placed both of her flour-dusted hands firmly on my shaking shoulders. "Mallory called me at 3 in the morning," she explained gently. "I was already wide awake baking. I had been waiting for your mother to pull something evil." "You didn't have to do all this," I sobbed. "That woman took a whole lot from you, honey," Rachel replied, squeezing my shoulders once. Her grip was firm and incredibly steady. "She is not taking today." Then she simply turned around and went right back to setting up the massive buffet line like absolutely nothing was wrong. I stood there in my expensive wedding dress, crying freely as dark mascara ran down my cheeks at 9:20 in the morning. I cried because I had wasted my entire life trying to magically earn my mother's impossible approval. And right here was a hard-working diner owner who had just given me something infinitely better without even being asked. She showed up. By 9:45, Mallory was gently touching up my ruined makeup while I sat in a metal folding chair, desperately trying to steady my breathing. Through the small window, I anxiously watched the gravel parking lot outside. The very first car to pull in was a dented gray Toyota Corolla, then a rusted blue pickup truck followed, then a shiny black SUV, then 4 more cars in a row, all arriving within minutes of each other. 15 tired nurses from Maplewood Memorial's pediatric ward confidently walked through the front doors of the church. They wore their absolute best dresses and neatly pressed shirts. Laura Morales, the tough charge nurse from the grueling night shift, proudly led the group. She carried a colorful mixed bouquet that I recognized instantly. Half of it was real flowers, and the other half were the cheap silk arrangements stolen straight from our hospital waiting room. Half the night shift swapped their schedules just to be here, Laura smiled, handing me the beautiful crazy bouquet. "Now don't you dare cry again and ruin that fresh mascara." I let out a wet laugh. It felt like the very first real, joyful sound I had made in a month. Right behind the nurses marched Mitchell's Homes for Hope construction crew, 8 rugged men and 4 women dressed in clean denim jeans and stiff ties, looking slightly out of place but standing incredibly tall. Behind them poured the neighbors from Beach Street, the Harrisons, the Masons, old Mr. Campbell, who used to sit on his porch and watch me ride my pink bicycle when I was just a kid. At exactly 10 a.m., a young woman I didn't recognize at first nervously walked in, tightly holding a little boy's hand. When she finally saw me, her tired eyes instantly filled with thick tears. "Bridget," she whispered. "I'm Samantha Whitaker. My son Connor was in your ICU last spring. You stayed awake with him for 10 straight hours when his oxygen dropped." The memory rushed back. He was 5 years old, fighting terrible pneumonia. "You saved my baby boy's life," Samantha cried softly. "I was absolutely not going to miss your wedding." 10:15 a.m., 95 people. 10:30 a.m. Cars were now parallel parked all the way down the dirt road because the massive church lot was completely full. Mallory stood tall by the main entrance holding a wooden clipboard, efficiently checking names and happily directing people to seats. The empty wooden pews rapidly filled up, one by one, but my heart still ached as I stared at one specific chair in the very front row that remained painfully empty. And I secretly wondered if anyone from my bloodline would be brave enough to fill it before the music started. 10:45 a.m. The old sanctuary hummed with vibrant life. Through the thin walls, I could hear the beautiful, chaotic sound of a packed room. Mitchell stood tall at the wooden altar in his sharp gray suit, his rough hands respectfully clasped together. His eyes were red-rimmed but fiercely steady. Pastor Gray smiled warmly, his worn leather Bible resting open on the podium. From the very back row, Mallory shot me a quick, reassuring thumbs up. I waited alone in the tiny dressing room, my delicate veil firmly pinned. My knuckles gripped the wild hospital flower bouquet Laura had magically pieced together. This is real. It is actually happening. Suddenly, the wooden door creaked open. Mallory stepped inside, her fierce expression softening completely. "Someone is here to see you." She gracefully stepped aside. Uncle Dave filled the narrow doorway. He was 65 years old, wearing a dusty gray suit that hung slightly too big across his broad shoulders. He had driven 5 straight hours from Charlotte through the dark morning. His tired eyes were already wet before he even spoke a single word. "I should have been there for you a long time ago," he whispered thickly. "Can I please walk you down the aisle?" My throat instantly closed. Tears threatened to spill again. "Uncle Dave, you really don't have to do that." "I want to," he insisted softly. "I have wanted to for 32 years. I reached out and took his offered arm. He gently patted my trembling hand exactly the way Gordy used to when I was just a little girl. That tiny, familiar gesture almost broke my heart. He remembers. He always cared. We stepped out into the bright hallway. Through the heavy double doors, I could see the massive church was bursting at the seams. Every single wooden pew was packed tight. It was standing room only in the back. Someone had even propped open the side doors to let the overflow crowd hear the ceremony. Right before Dave pulled me forward to begin the long walk, the heavy sanctuary doors groaned loudly on their brass hinges. The entire packed church went dead silent. 242 breathing people suddenly stopped. Gordy Harrington stood frozen in the open doorway. My dad, he didn't dare look at me. Instead, he walked straight up the long center aisle. His slumped shoulders carried the heavy, invisible weight of 36 years of marital surrender. The crowd parted silently for him. He marched right up to Mitchell at the altar. Slowly reaching into his slacks, he pulled out his own grandfather's antique gold pocket watch, the precious family heirloom he always promised he would give to his future son-in-law. Without speaking, he firmly pressed the cold metal into Mitchell's large hand. Mitchell gripped the gold tight, nodding respectfully. My father nodded back once. Then, he immediately turned around and walked right back out those heavy doors. He couldn't stay to watch. Delilah would never allow it, but he bravely made sure we absolutely knew he supported us. He gave what he could. A silent blessing. A hot tear slid silently down my cheek. Across the room, Laura proudly hit play on a cheap Bluetooth speaker balanced carefully on the stained glass windowsill. The chosen song was slightly too loud, and the tiny speaker buzzed harshly on the high notes. It was absolutely perfect. We walked. 242 wonderful people rose to their feet. I clearly heard Rachel loudly blow her nose somewhere to my left. Down in the third row, little Connor Whitaker tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, is that the nice nurse?" His sweet voice echoed in the quiet space. Dave leaned close as we finally reached the front steps, his voice barely a breath. "Your daddy is waiting outside in the parking lot. He just couldn't come inside." I looked up at Mitchell. He was crying quietly, no loud sobs, just silent, happy tears running straight down into his wide smile. I let go of Dave, took my husband's warm hand, and stepped bravely forward. Pastor Gray beamed at the massive congregation. "We are gathered here today," his booming voice began, "because love showed up anyway, even when the original plan totally fell apart." A powerful murmur of amens rippled through the crowded room. Mitchell spoke his vows first. He didn't read from a fancy card. He just looked deeply into my eyes and talked the exact way he always does. Plain, honest, and direct, like he was telling me a vital secret over morning coffee. "Bridge, I build things for a living. Today I am building a forever life with you, and absolutely no one gets to demolish that." I heard Laura gasp, "Oh my God," from the fourth row. Then it was my turn. I had nervously written my promises 3 different times and trashed every single version. So I just spoke my absolute truth. "Mitchell, you were the very first person who gently told me I did not need permission to be happy. It took me a long while, but I finally believe you now." The entire room erupted into wild applause. Rachel cried completely openly, not even trying to wipe her wet face. Old Mr. Campbell from Beach Street let out a piercing, joyous 2-finger whistle that bounced happily off the high vaulted ceiling. Laura's stolen bouquet was literally falling apart in my hands, and she was frantically trying to hold it together while clapping wildly. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Gray shouted over the noise, "by the great state of Virginia and this beautiful community right here, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Mitchell leaned in and kissed me. The church basically exploded with joy. Mallory furiously counted heads on her wooden clipboard. 242. Nearly 100 more loving souls than my mother's original poisoned guest list. I gripped Mitchell's strong hand tightly and glanced toward the tall side window. Through the clear glass, I could barely see the far edge of the gravel parking lot. My father's faded green truck sat parked quietly under a massive oak tree. The engine was completely off. The driver's seat was occupied by a shadow. He had come, but he hadn't walked in. I stared at my father's hidden truck for exactly 5 seconds. "Goodbye, Dad. I love you." Then I firmly turned my head back to look at my smiling husband, and I consciously chose my beautiful, unwritten future. We had survived the emotional ceremony, but the wild reception was about to bring the final guests I never expected to see. The vibrant reception exploded into the church's side yard under a massive canopy of ancient, weeping live oaks. Rachel's kitchen crew had magically set up 2 long wooden tables groaning under the weight of enough hot food to feed the entire county. Thick roast beef, buttery green beans, golden cornbread, and 4 completely different kinds of cake. Somebody from Mitchell's construction crew hauled out a battered portable speaker and plugged in a folk playlist that skipped loudly every 3rd song. Nobody cared about the skipping music. People happily danced on the damp grass in their stiff church shoes. Little Connor Whitaker ran wildly between the tables with a flaky biscuit clutched in each tiny hand. Old Mr. Campbell proudly told anyone who would listen that he knew Mitchell was a good man the absolute minute he fixed Rachel's roof for free. This isn't a fake show, I thought, watching them laugh. This is what breathing actually feels like. Around 2 p.m., the very first stragglers from my mother's original, canceled guest list started showing up. Cousin Roy pulled his dusty pickup into the gravel lot looking utterly confused. He eventually found me standing by the dessert table. "Bridge, what the hell?" he asked, his brow deeply furrowed. "Your mama swore this was entirely canceled. Does this look canceled to you?" I asked gently. He slowly looked around, 250 people eating, laughing, and dancing freely. His face went through something incredibly complicated, confusion melting quickly into profound shock. "She lied," I stated softly. "She called every single person on my guest list at 3 in the morning and told them I was having a mental breakdown." Roy took off his worn ball cap, rubbed his balding head, and put it back on. "I am so sorry, Bridge." 3 more embarrassed families from the church arrived shortly after, each carrying the exact same shocking story, each wearing the same stunned expression when they saw the massive crowd. Mrs. Peterson, the very woman who had put down her donut in the fellowship hall last Wednesday, found me near the makeshift dance floor. She reached out and took both of my hands tightly. "Delilah told us you were terribly sick," she whispered, her eyes full of deep shame. "We should have called you first." I didn't need to say a single angry word. The undeniable truth was standing right there in that grassy yard. 242 witnesses who had shown up simply because they knew me, not because my mother commanded them. The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand in the light. Late in the afternoon, the wild reception was finally winding down. Someone had brought long sparklers, and a few of the burly construction guys were playfully teaching the little kids how to write their names in the smoky air. I quietly stepped away from the joyful noise and walked to the far edge of the yard where the soft grass met the rough gravel road. Mitchell immediately followed my shadow. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah, I just need to do one last thing." I pulled out my cell phone and deliberately unblocked my mother's number. Not to let her back in, but just to send one final, unbreakable message. I quickly typed it out while standing there in my white wedding dress, totally barefoot on the cool grass, with the beautiful sound of 250 people celebrating my freedom right behind me. "Mom, I got married today. It was beautiful." 242 people came. None of them were the people you called. "I want you to know I don't hate you. I understand you. But understanding you does not mean I will let you keep hurting me. This is my absolute boundary. Do not contact me, Mitchell, or anyone in our life until you have completed at least 8 months of individual therapy with a licensed therapist. I will not respond to calls, texts, or visits before that. I love you, but I love myself more now. Bridget." I hit send. I watched the glowing screen eagerly. Delivered. No read receipt. I instantly blocked her number again. Mitchell read the heavy message over my shoulder. He didn't comment on the harsh words. He just wrapped his strong arm around my waist, and we stood there together for a peaceful minute, watching the bright sparklers trace golden lines in the darkening evening air. "You okay?" he asked again. "I am infinitely better than okay." He kissed the top of my head. I slipped my phone deep into my pocket and walked right back to my beautiful wedding. The speaker had finally stopped skipping. Laura was loudly teaching Rachel how to line dance. It was, by every single measure that truly matters, the absolute best day of my life. One short week after the wedding, Maplewood did exactly what small towns do best. It talked. The wild stories spread the way gossip always does in a town of 9,500 people. Fast, messy, and in every possible direction at once. By Tuesday morning, everyone at the Methodist Church clearly knew that Delilah Harrington had frantically called 140 people in the middle of the dark night just to say her own daughter was mentally unstable. By Thursday afternoon, they all knew it was a complete, calculated lie. A queen's crown only stays on if the village actually believes in her. 3 prominent families instantly withdrew from the volunteer committee Delilah had proudly led for 10 long years. Pastor Gray called her personally and gently suggested she take a huge step back from the church events board. He politely used the word sabbatical. Everyone deeply understood what that actually meant. The local women who used to sit faithfully with Delilah at the busy coffee shop on Oliver Street quietly started leaving an empty chair between themselves and her. Not dramatically, not with any loud announcement. They just subtly shifted away from the poison. Rachel ran into Delilah at the local grocery store the following Sunday. They awkwardly ended up at the meat counter at the exact same time. Rachel didn't say a single hateful word. She just looked at Delilah, held the icy gaze for exactly long enough to make her squirm, and turned her back. Aunt Grace called me for the very first time since her furious text. "I owe you a massive apology," she admitted softly. "Your mother told me awful things that simply weren't true." "I know," I replied calmly. "Thank you for calling." That same messy week, Delilah desperately posted a sad photo on Facebook. It was a faded, old picture of me at 7 years old, happily sitting on her lap. The pathetic caption read, "My heart is broken. Please pray for our family." I heard all about it from Mallory. 5 pity likes, 0 comments, no prayer hand emojis, absolutely nothing. Then Gordy called. His voice was incredibly tired in a painful way I had never heard before, not just physically exhausted, but completely emptied out, like a man who had finally stopped running from a terrifying monster. "I saw the pictures," he murmured. "You looked beautiful, baby girl." Then came silence, a long, hollow, devastating pause, and he hung up. My mother's iron kingdom had entirely collapsed in just 7 short days, but the crushing silence from my father's broken heart was about to echo in a way I never saw coming. 2 months after the wedding bells stopped ringing, Uncle Dave called me. "Your daddy came by my house last night," he said, his voice sounding thick with disbelief. "First time in 6 long years he's crossed my porch." He just sat there and didn't say much at all. "What did he actually say, Dave?" I asked, gripping the phone. Mostly nothing, kid. He drank exactly a third of a cold beer. He stared out at the yard for 2 hours. Then, right before he stood up to leave, he asked me one single question. I waited, my heart hammering. He looked at me and whispered, "Did I lose her?" The words landed like a heavy punch right in my ribs. "You didn't lose me, Dad. You just let her hide me for 30 years. What did you tell him? I told him the hard truth. I said, "I don't know, Gordy. That's entirely up to Bridget now." I sat with that heavy thought for a long time after the call ended. I didn't feel any sick satisfaction. I didn't feel like a winner in a game. I just felt like a woman who had finally mourned the father she never truly had. Dave told me more over the following weeks. Gordy had started going for long walks in the early morning all by himself, something he had never done in his entire life. Delilah had always dictated every second of their schedule, their bland meals, and their hollow social calendar. But now he walked to the little coffee shop on Oliver Street alone. He ordered a plain black coffee. He sat at a corner table by the window and quietly read the newspaper. The neighbors noticed the change. Hugh Mason told Dave he'd seen Gordy sitting there 4 mornings in a row, looking like a lonely man who had just moved to a brand new town and didn't know a single soul yet. I think losing me was the very first time my father realized he had been losing himself for 36 years. He realized that the silent recliner, the muted ball games, and the quiet dinners weren't actually peace. It was just a man who had traded his own voice for a bit of quiet so long ago that he had forgotten he ever had one. A lot of people ask me, "Did your father ever reach out again?" The answer is incredibly complicated. 4 months after the ceremony, my mother's world had shrunk to the size of a postage stamp. She lost her proud position on the church events board. Everyone in Maplewood knew the ugly truth. The charity committee she had led for 12 years held a sudden election and chose a younger woman. Her annual Christmas cookie exchange happened without her for the first time in history. But Delilah Harrington did not break. She did not apologize. She didn't call a single therapist. Instead, she got ice-cold angry. Dave told me she had been telling anyone who would still listen that Mitchell had brainwashed me. She claimed I was being manipulated by outsiders. She swore that one day I would come to my senses and crawl back home to her. I heard these things secondhand, but I didn't respond. I didn't post any angry corrections. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its silent work. 242 people had seen the joy with their own eyes. Delilah did not go to therapy. She did not meet my one simple condition. My phone stayed blissfully quiet. The boundary held like a stone wall. Some people wanted a different ending to this part. They wanted me to say she broke down, called me sobbing, and showed up at my door with a bouquet of apologies. That would make a prettier story, but this is my real life, and in my life, some people would rather lose their own daughter than admit they were ever wrong. I didn't set that boundary to punish her. I set it to survive her. Every single morning that I woke up in a house where no one criticized my hair, monitored my phone calls, or told me I wasn't enough, every morning like that was proof the wall was working. 8 months passed in a beautiful blur. Mitchell and I bought a fixer-upper house 5 miles outside of town. It had 4 bedrooms, a wide-screened porch, and a yard big enough for a dog to run until he was tired. Mitchell spent his weekends rebuilding the porch railing, his hands always covered in sawdust. I planted tomatoes that died in the first frost, so I just laughed and replanted them in the spring. Rachel Preston started coming over for Wednesday dinner. Every single week, without fail, she would bring a homemade pie and stay for 4 hours. We would eat at the kitchen table while Mitchell asked her a million questions about running a small business. She answered every one with the patience of a woman who had been waiting decades for someone to actually care what she thought. Wednesday dinners became our new tradition. Mallory drove up from Alexandria twice a month. Laura Morales came with her husband. The neighbors from Beach Street showed up so often their daughter started calling me Aunt Bridge. It was a family built from scratch, held together by nothing but choice. In March, I told Mitchell I was pregnant. He slowly put down his power drill. He walked across the half-finished nursery and held me without saying a single word for 5 solid minutes. When he finally pulled back, he was crying. Quiet, happy tears that ran straight down into his beard. Mallory claimed the title of Aunt Mallory before the very first ultrasound was even finished. I hung our wedding photo in the center of the living room. It wasn't a professional shot. One of the nurses had taken it on her old iPhone. The angle was a little crooked. The lighting was way too harsh, but in that frame, 242 people were crowded into a small church. Every single face was turned toward Mitchell and me. Every single person was smiling. No one in that photo was performing a role. No one was curating a fake image for the neighbors. They were just there because they loved us. My family didn't get smaller after the wedding. It finally got real. But a simple postcard was about to arrive in my mailbox that would change my father's silence into something I never expected to read. Exactly 9 months after I walked down that church aisle, I walked out to my front curb to check the mail. The warm spring sun was shining. I reached inside the metal box and pulled out a single piece of cardboard. Not a demanding text, not a guilt-tripping voicemail, a simple postcard. The glossy front showed a brightly painted largemouth bass jumping out of a blue lake. It was the exact kind of cheap souvenir you would find spinning on a rusty rack at a gas station off the interstate. The exact kind my father and I used to point at and laugh about on our quiet morning drives to the fishing dock when I was 13 years old. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned the thick paper over. There was his familiar handwriting. It was cramped, written entirely in stiff capital letters, using the same black marker he had used to meticulously label every single cardboard box in our garage my whole life. "I'm proud of you. Day Ad." 5 short words. There was no long explanation. There was no grand apology for his decades of cowardly silence. And most importantly, there was absolutely no mention of my mother. I stood frozen at the edge of the driveway, gripping that postcard for a very long time. The mail carrier was already 3 houses down the street, completely unaware that he had just delivered a miracle. A bright red cardinal sat perched on our wooden fence, watching me quietly like it had somewhere much better to be. He finally spoke. My mind whispered. He found his own voice. I walked slowly back inside my safe, quiet house. I sat down heavily on the gray couch, and just cried for 6 solid minutes. They were not bitter tears. They were the heavy, cleansing kind. Then I walked into the kitchen and gently placed the postcard into the special drawer where I keep the only things that truly matter. It rests right beside the biscuit recipe Rachel wrote out for me on a diner napkin, the black and white ultrasound printout of my growing baby, and Mitchell's beautiful vows folded neatly on notebook paper. I didn't call my father back that day. I wasn't ready to open that heavy door just yet, but I also didn't throw the postcard away. Uncle Dave called a few weeks later to tell me a secret. Gordy had actually started seeing a professional therapist. Just 2 private sessions so far. That is exactly 2 more times than he had ever gone in his entire 62 years on Earth. Dave told me Gordy drove 35 minutes each way in absolute secret, simply because he was terrified Delilah would find out. My father isn't fully ready to stand up yet, and neither am I ready to let him back in. But at the very least he is finally using his own words now, instead of echoing hers. That painted postcard sits patiently in my drawer waiting. The exact same way I waited for him for 32 years. Except now the terms of our relationship belong entirely to me. I used to honestly believe that setting a firm boundary meant I was a terrible, ungrateful daughter. I thought that putting physical and emotional distance between myself and my mother was a deep character flaw. I viewed it as something selfish, a sign that something was permanently broken inside of me. I carried that toxic belief for most of my adult life, like a jagged stone hiding deep in my pocket. It was heavy enough to always feel it dragging me down, but small enough to pretend it wasn't there. I don't carry that ugly stone anymore. If you are listening to this story today, and you clearly recognize a Delilah in someone you deeply love, a controlling mother, a silent father, a toxic sibling, I am not going to sit here and tell you what to do. I am not a trained therapist. I am just a pediatric nurse from a tiny town in Virginia who bravely got married in a church full of strangers because her mother tried to cancel her joy. But I will tell you the most painful lesson I ever learned. You cannot love someone into being safe. You can blindly show up every single time they demand it. You can instantly forgive every vicious lie they tell. You can quietly absorb every cruel insult, return every frantic phone call, and dutifully attend every suffocating family dinner. And they will still choose to control you over actually connecting with you, simply because dominance is the only language they know how to speak. The only person you can truly make safe is yourself. My wedding day was far from perfect. The flowers I carried were half cheap silk stolen from a hospital waiting room. The dessert was vanilla sponge cake from Rachel's diner, not the elegant 4-tiered fondant masterpiece I had originally ordered. My tough uncle openly sobbed through the entire walk down the aisle. The borrowed speaker crackled loudly on every high note. The hot food was served directly on disposable aluminum trays. And the absolute best photograph from the entire magical day is slightly blurry. But every single person standing inside that church actively chose to be there. Nobody was guilt-tripped into coming. Nobody was violently threatened. Nobody was faking a smile or performing a role for an audience. That pure, unfiltered choice is exactly what real love looks like. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. I didn't tell it because I wanted petty revenge. I shared it because somewhere out there someone desperately needed to hear that they do not need permission to breathe. You do not need anyone's approval to build a life that is entirely yours. One last thing before I go. If my painful journey reminded you of someone you know, or maybe even someone you are, I want to hear your voice. Drop a comment below and tell me, what boundary have you been terrified to set? Or if you have already set one, what did it cost you? And was it finally worth your freedom? If you truly connected with this story, hit subscribe and check the description for more real stories just like mine. There's a wild one about a young woman whose greedy family tried to steal her entire inheritance right at a funeral. Trust me, you will absolutely want to hear that one next. I can't wait to see you there.